From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts, where leaders from across America's civic landscape share practical lessons for navigating complexity, earning trust, and helping communities move forward together. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Across the United States, nearly 90,000 local governments and hundreds of thousands of nonprofit organizations are working every day to strengthen their communities. This podcast brings you inside that work, offering practical ideas and hard-earned lessons you can apply in your own leadership.
As much as we want plans to be rational and to have solid strategy, that people are fundamentally emotional than rational. And so building the safe place is also to recognize somebody's full humanity.
That's Matt Sandoval, CEO of Art Heals Arizona, a Phoenix-based nonprofit that connects young people who've experienced trauma with caring adult mentors through the arts. Founded nearly 3 decades ago as Free Arts for Abused Children of Arizona, the organization recently completed a thoughtful rebrand that reflects a broader understanding of its mission, not simply responding to the effects of trauma, but helping young people build confidence, resilience, and hope for the future. Matt's leadership has been shaped by work across social work, education, clinical practice, and nonprofit leadership. Rather than seeing organizations primarily as structures to manage, he's come to see them as human systems to understand. I'm looking forward to exploring how that perspective has reshaped his understanding of leadership and what leaders in every sector can learn from it. Matt Sandoval, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Matt.
Well, it's great to meet you. And Matt, before we talk about leadership, why don't you introduce us all to Art Heals Arizona? What does the organization do? Who does it serve? And how does creative expression fit into the healing process for young people who've experienced trauma?
We're about a pretty simple formula. So on the walls, on our shirts, a lot of our tags, you'll see art plus mentors equals resilience. And that tells the story in just 3 words, because we are about experiences with the arts. And we do this through training volunteer adult mentors to work with children, teens, and families who've been affected by the child welfare system. So our population might be in foster care currently. We also serve populations that include people who live in shelters for experiencing homelessness, or for families who may have experienced recent episodes of domestic violence. So our population, the groups that we are working in are very specific and vulnerable. They've been through some difficult things. And what we do is train ordinary people to work in those spaces through the arts. And we do that by also recruiting teaching artists, professional teaching artists that we compensate to facilitate some of our programming. Every year, we serve between 4,000 and 6,000 people, mostly in Maricopa County, more recently in the Tucson area. And as our name tells you, Art Heals Arizona, we consider our state to be our home and the places where we'd like to partner and serve.
Matt, is this a uniquely Arizona creation, or are there examples of programs like this all over the country?
Yeah, in 1993, our founder, Margaret Beresford, who is a practicing board-certified art therapist, heard of a project called Free Arts in LA and was so inspired that she brought that concept back here and partnered with others to get it off the ground. So in 1993, it was private yard sales, rummage sales, and serving 50 kids was the achievement. 33 years later, we've matured as a nonprofit, serving that number that I just gave you, around 4,000 to 6,000 per year. But it has grown from that initial idea. So there are other concepts similar to us in other states with different populations, some serving in the schools, primarily focusing on access to the arts for everyone. And here in our space, for a couple of structural and important reasons, we've really stayed true to the initial populations that we focused on in terms of who we're serving. But what's in common is that there's not a charge. We took Free Arts as a name and changed it, but we do not charge our participants. We don't charge our partner agencies. We're a charity. We accept donations, and we offer our services through public support.
Tell us a bit about the business model behind Art Heals Arizona. Then, if you're not charging for the services, you're grants and contributions dependent?
In the nonprofit space, the most important thing is to develop over time a sustainable financial plan and to not live week by week, month by month. That's very much the case in the early days, particularly for startups, that they are $150,000 grant and that's got us for 3 months. And then what do we do in the next 3 months? And then so on. We're in that stage where we've thought about allocation, revenue diversification. And so our funding comes from primarily some large areas, individual support. So people who live in and around the Phoenix area and Arizona support us to about 45 to 50% of our total operating budget. And then large foundation grants, small number of government grants, but then also corporate partners. And in each of these categories are often groups of people who also donate and volunteer with us. And that's particularly true for our corporate partners. So some of the biggest companies in town are definitely a huge presence in what we do here. So you roll all of that mixture together and it creates an operating budget that keeps us sustainable and looking toward the future.
Let's talk about the organization a little bit. As I mentioned in the intro, the rebrand went from originally Free Arts for Abused Children. I know for many years it was officially simply Free Arts. Now it's Art Heals Arizona. It strikes me that there's probably more going on here than just identity. It may have also something to do with an evolution of how the organization understands its mission and the work that it's called upon to do. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I'd love to. And fortunately, we're at the space where most of the decision making, the announcement, and the reception is more and more in the rearview mirror. And we're seeing kind of the first fruits of it. So it's a fun place to be where in different parts of it being considered or actually being implemented, there is still a little unknown risk happening. Like what's going to happen? How are people going to handle this? And so to go back to it, I think evolution of thought and the agency is absolutely right. And this had been something held by some people on our board for quite a long period of time. And this had been thought about and considered, gotten very close, even to the point where they were workshopping names and thinking about the concept, because essentially there's a choice you make. When we call something free arts, we're describing it in a function. You know, we provide this to people, but to who and for what? And so we get people who come into the building thinking, you know, they can take an art class here, or we can give them art supplies. You know, it's general, right? So you're kind of being descriptive. And that was kind of a minor concern around free arts. The secondary component that was more serious was putting the word abuse in the title caused us to be very careful about where we use the title of the org, because participants in the programs, the children and teens, they did not like seeing that. And I don't blame them, right? That is not who they are. It is something they've been through perhaps, but it's not who they are. And so to see it as a label caused us, and this predates my tenure. I've been with the org almost 4 years. So as I got here, I was told kind of in the first couple of weeks, we have 2 sets of marketing collateral, internal facing, public facing around children and teens, you know, the actual people that we serve. And we would not have the Free Arts for Abused Children title out where people could see it because it made people uncomfortable. And that's something you don't want around your name. You want people to be able to write it wherever. And so we had shortened it over time to just Free Arts, but that created a very general sounding concept. The deeper side of this, for those who think about how we name things, particularly in a world where we're thinking about image, we're thinking about impression, we're thinking about issues of equity and social justice, you know, what does the name sound like to those who have to claim it in some way or have an attachment to it? And so we intentionally kept art, and then Heals was pretty much there and grounding it in Arizona because people understand what the phrase means. So in terms of case study material, why we did it, how we did it, what choices we make, because you can make different choices about where you go when you decide to have a name that takes stigma out. And then also how you decide to manage this change with people that you depend on to either volunteer for you or donate to you. So there's an entire change management strategy that had to be thought through.
I'm going to follow this up a little bit. I was thinking as you were saying all that, I wanted to ask you what you hope people will understand differently about the organization's work going forward. But just to backtrack a little bit, the original name sounds like it might have resonated really well with donors. The Free Arts name, just consolidated that way, sounded like a pretty clear definition of the feature of how we work. And now what I think you're saying is the Art Heals really speaks to the benefit of what we deliver.
100%. And in fact, I think the proof of the pudding is in little statements, little cards that people give us a comment when they volunteer or where they donate. And because most of individual donations come in through credit card systems, the system prompts, why did you donate today? And you can fill in that box. And sometimes people just write Art Heals Arizona, exclamation point. And so that's it in itself. Like, this is when you say we changed it, and this happened to me in person, I would tell people we're changing the name. They're like, what are you changing it to? And I'd say Art Heals Arizona. And they'd go, yes. And so the phrasing itself moves somebody to say, I'm in.
I love that. Matt, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about you specifically, because just as Art Heals has evolved over time, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and kind of getting to know you before we sat down for this conversation. And I gather that, you've evolved as well. Your career has taken you through education, the YMCA. You've worked in developmental disability services, clinical therapy, and now nonprofit leadership. We don't have time to give the entire bio and background of everything, but on the face of it, they seem like very different worlds. And yet you seem to have found some common threads running through them. I wonder if you could tell us, what are the common threads that you've managed to pull together here?
Yeah, I think that's really a powerful way to look at it, and that there's common threads to these different things. And when I think about the essential reason that this has happened, I come back to knowing that there is some part of all of us that is really kind of co-constructed both by our interests and our experiences. And so we can start off, right? All the pressure we give to a teenager to tell us, what do you want to do with your life? Like, what an immense question, and I'm 51 and somebody asked me, I'd be like, oh, let me think about it. Like, it's an immense question. Like, what do you want to do with your life? Right. And so coming to grips with understanding that part of your experiences have all shaped you in such a way. And that itself it's an art form, seeing your life and what opportunities you've had, what hardships you've had, what resilience you may have shown, what regrets you might carry, what you might see as your next step forward. That commitment to being somebody who evolves into the next space is something that's really important to me. But in the end, it really does start with some stories of early examples. To see something important, that adults professionally spend time with teens and everyone benefits, that there is something unique for everyone. It is something that is important because it's profoundly human to connect that way. And I don't think that's only a nonprofit thing. I don't think it's only an education thing. I think you could do this in pretty much any field. And often when you ask people, what do you care about the most, regardless of what they're doing, they're going to give you some form of relational answer. It's the people I work with. It's the customer. It's the satisfaction. It's the experience. But I've had the pleasure of being able to move around those spaces. So what's true essentially throughout my life is that I've worked with children, teens, and families for 20 plus years. And at each level, I kept thinking, what could I add to this? And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to add clinical training to it and develop that as a skill set. So all of those things shape us, both our life, both our directions, our sense of values, then also a continued sense that just because I'm in my mid 40s doesn't mean I don't need another master's degree. And I'm not, suggesting people go out there and take on debt. I know it's expensive. I had some opportunities come my way and I took advantage of them. But that just gave me another way, another set of tools to continue to do. Essentially, what I saw was create safe spaces for people who've suffered more than their share to find a place to recalibrate, to take steps that are important to them, and to live a life that matters to them.
I want to repeat back some of the key words that you just said and see if I could ask you if there's a way to distill that down to one or maybe just two words. You said safe space, mentorship, home, secure, connection. What is that thing? What is that glowing stick that keeps calling to you? How do you define that in a word or two?
Well, the one word is attachment, right? So and then there's the science behind it. And that we are, as humans, mammals, animals do this too, but we uniquely need to attach to others. And we know this in infancy. We know this in families. This is why, and I always think it's funny when people are like, family's number one. Well, well, stop bragging. It's supposed to be. But I get why people do it because some places it's not a value, or for some people that's a hardship. But well, yeah, family's number one because attachment's number one. We are literally wired to connect because life is hard and it's much harder when we're on our own.
Is attachment simply the mission that you feel the calling to, or does the idea of attachment also inform the type of leadership that you supply as the CEO of a nonprofit organization?
I think it's all related. Those are two really powerful ways to think about it. I think we're essentially wired to attach, and this is both it's the setup and also the difficulty. We need the relationship. It is probably likely that what we think of as regulation of emotion is always co-regulation, the presence of safe others, the presence of people who care for us. And we know this because you can play the sound of someone's voice and it's their mother who's been gone for 30 years and their heart rate will go down. It's been primed into them to hear mom, to hear someone who cares for them. And everybody listening could probably think to a moment where they were redlining, they were hot, they were overwhelmed, and that right person knew how to kind of bring it down just by being there, not solving it, not taking over the scene. So we're wired for that. But then also on a social structure as a leader, recognizing that as much as we want plans to be rational and to have solid strategy, that people are fundamentally emotional than rational. Second, we've been wired for that for protection reasons. And so I'm not saying that everybody should walk around emotionally overwhelmed, but to go around in your work and leadership life thinking that people are not responding to everything they're encountering in some emotional register. We have probably somewhere between 200 and 300 separate emotions an hour. And that's if you're just sitting there on the internet, and depending on what you're clicking on, it's probably a lot more, right? And so people have this context to them. And so building the safe place is also to recognize somebody's full humanity. Sometimes the safe place idea gets this, kind of black eye that it means nothing hard will happen. No, we take out the things that don't need to be hard so that we can prepare people to do the hard thing that's important to them, right? So if you want to run the marathon, you want to go to college, you want to call up your crush and talk about, life and ask them out for a date. I mean, that's terrifying stuff. It could be across the board, right? So a safe space doesn't mean we make life not what it is. It means we don't make it harder than it needs to be in order to get the skills that you need.
Let's take this from the ethereal to the tactical. Matt, you know that many of the people who are listening to this podcast are themselves city managers and school superintendents and elected officials and nonprofit leaders. Every day, they are making decisions that affect people who may never be in the room with them. And I'm curious, if you were giving a talk to an audience full of civic leaders like this, and you wanted to give them some specific instruction about what you know about attachment and the way people bind together and what makes them effective, what's a piece of advice, inspirational, instructive? What would you specifically tell leaders that they could take, that they could learn from your experience?
I would go back to something we do here all the time with our mentoring. And I'd ask people to take their hand and trace in a typical hand, there's 5 fingers there, and think through who are 5 people that are important to you. And if we had enough time, we would decorate it. We would make it pretty. We would make it art, right? So part of my answer to you is I would help people experience what I'm about to tell them before I tell them that, okay? And I think that's also putting the humanity first, is that we always think that we need to have the solid point. And if we have the tight enough sound bite, then we'll win the day. And that's exactly why rhetoric just keeps winding and winding around, because we're ignoring this vast ocean of emotion underneath. So back to the art project, which is go ahead and draw, give me the 5 people and tell me about them. What was it they did? What was it they were like? What was a moment that connected you to them? What was it? What was the circumstance? What did they tell you? What was the moment that broke through for you? And then we would work through that to find themes, because what we are starting to realize here is that in those moments that you've picked as your top 5, somebody on the other side had enough presence to know this is a time to ask more questions. This is a time to wait. This is a time to tell you, I see the effort you're giving and I see the frustration and I'm here to help you, versus giving you the quick move. Or what's really hard in our day and age, people have had this happen where you're sharing something super intense or meaningful and they start looking at their phone. And so even just knowing that somebody's full presence is with you in a moment that's difficult makes all the difference. So I would help these people write the recipe of what they felt and then ask themselves, how do I create that when it's necessary? This is not every meeting, but people know that in this space, right, that it can happen. And now part of my function here is as a leader, throughout the last 15-ish years, people cry in my office a lot, and I don't actually make them cry. And I used to feel really bad, like we just start talking about how things are going and their life a little bit, and then they start crying. I mean, there's Kleenex right over my shoulder now. And I used to think, like, do I do something here? And what I started to realize over time, and this is specifically to that audience you're talking about, is when we build the container for people to feel safe and really stare at reality just as it is, then those feelings will come up on their own. And the presence of somebody here who can just be with and not flinch makes the difference. It's not always possible to really solve all the dilemmas in that meeting, but to give someone the sense that I hear you, that this is our problem together, that you are not alone, and that you're certainly not unreasonable for feeling this way makes the difference.
Matt, I'm going to restate this and tell me if I'm getting what your point is here. For a lot of people in leadership positions, we think about strategic planning and we think about vision and planning and decision-making and execution. What I think I'm hearing you say is, before you get into all of that, start with understanding the people who are there, their unique perspectives, their worldviews, their lived experience that brought them to that moment, their aspirations. And like you said, you want to get them crying. It's make sure that they feel heard. The relief that comes from feeling heard is immense.
Yeah.
And do that before you do the work. Is that the message here?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this is not departing too far from very familiar things, right? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Like, that's classic business writing, good old Stephen Covey. Like, some of these things circle. But the trouble, I think, for leaders is they write the platitude on the wall, but they don't embody the presence in the moment. And so just allowing people to have that full humanity moment means the world. And so understanding that container of I have that presence of seeking really to understand where somebody is. And also understanding that some of these things that are hardships are kind of like the edge side, maybe the shadow, if you will, and kind of the Jungian sense of where their strengths operate. I'm built this way. I have high values, high work ethic, and something is in the way of my sense of honesty and the fact that I really want to put in the extra effort. And now I'm super frustrated.
One of the things that you shared with me in preparation for our conversation today, you said that you can read an organization the way a clinician reads a family system. And I suspect that's a completely new way of thinking for many of our listeners. So I want to ask you to explain what that really means and what do you do with that information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way I describe it to others in a more accessible moment is particularly when it's a newer leader, helping them understand, great, this is the best day of your life. Also, it's the worst day of your life. And this is a whole new type of work, because just simply being the leader in a space is like the magnet and the filings. The magnet doesn't know it's arranging the iron filings, right? Like the filings move in and around that function of leadership. And the sooner somebody can start to realize that your engagement with people always has terms that they can't share with you, the power differential creates that. And when you look at the ways leaders handle that, there's a couple choices. If you've been to the workplace where it's clear the leader is insecure and everybody must clap real hard, you know what that sounds like. People are, I remember being told by a senior VP, when so-and-so finishes their talk, please stand and clap. And I thought it was the most ludicrous thing I ever heard. And that was that person's job, was to really buffer the CEO's feelings. And what a terrible thing to add to another professional who's probably highly skilled in many other things. But that's real. And so part of that as a leader is, do I, in whatever securities and insecurities I carry, I'm human, I have them too. Am I expecting the team to make up the difference? Right? If I call a meeting and say you all have to be here and demand them to be happy about it, that's a power move. It's not a connection move.
Let me ask you here. So if you walk into an organization for the first time, not Art Heals, but any other organization, what are the things that you're paying attention to that help you read an organization?
I think that in reading an organization, you're noticing where there's a difference between the things they say and the way they act. So I think essentially what we believe is what we do. So we could put trust and open dialogue on the wall, but is there more or less gossip since that sign went up? And gossip's normal. It's one of the most human ways to deal with trouble, is to let the crowd try to change the behavior by creating a narrative. And this is like hunter-gatherer campfire stuff. It goes that far back. Like, we control each other with things like gossip. Or have we created spaces and people have survived to tell this tale of, I surfaced something important that is a hardship, and I'm here to tell you they heard us out, and maybe we found a couple new ways to do these things. So people know right away, is this the speech? Is this the book somebody read, or is this the book somebody's living? So I think there's always some measure of a gap between what we say and how we actually operate.
That's a really interesting takeaway for leaders of all types in local government, in nonprofits, and elsewhere, I suppose, that the first thing you do is you do an assessment of what are the promises we make and what are the behaviors that we actually accept or allow to happen. And where there is a difference, realize that is, what would you call that? An inefficiency, it's a drain on our system.
It's a blind spot often. So I want to stress again that we're not perfect, and neither am I, but also the willingness to even say, like, there has got to be a difference between what we think we're doing and what people feel like we're doing across the team structure. That has to surface at some point.
Let me ask you to respond. There's an adage I heard at a change management workshop years ago that I've always kind of taken it to be true, but I wonder if you would agree or disagree with this. It's the saying that says that when you're the change leader, you come into an organization, you can expect that a third of the people are with you, a third are against you, and a third are waiting to see which way the wind blows.
I agree. And I think that's probably a function of what they stand to gain at the moment they're introduced to you. So for some people, that third that are with you want the blank slate. Like, okay, we're just going to do different things. I've been kind of frustrated, or I'm just new, or I don't know the difference. And a third, this kind of goes back to how we handle stress, right? Fight or flight, all the F's, right? There's more than fight or flight. You can fawn, you can freeze. But that group that's waiting in the middle, that's your classic. Like, we're just going to wait and see what happens here. That's that.
Matt, we're approaching the end, and I want to wrap this up by kind of starting at the micro and moving up the macro a little bit, which is, I'm really impressed with your abilities to read the emotional state of people around you and how that attachment is part of your calling. You talked about doing that as a marriage counselor. You talk about doing that to help children who need to heal from trauma that they've experienced. You talked about being able to come in and read an organization. So you and I are having this conversation on June 29th. So we're less than a week away from the 4th of July and the 250th anniversary of our nation. And I am curious, and I'm kind of surprising you with this, I know. Can you turn your emotional sensors to society writ large and tell me, in this moment, is there something that you would hope that civic leaders and nonprofit leaders might read about where our society is today? Something that you would want us to better understand about one another in this moment?
Yeah, I have a relevant recent experience. My father-in-law passed away in March, and my family went back in late May for the funeral. As we tell it, city mouse met country mouse and fell in love. So my wife moved to go to Grand Canyon here in the Phoenix area, Grand Canyon University, from basically Marion, Indiana, northern Indiana, rural. And so that means we've traveled back and forth for almost 30 years. And I've seen the difference between a big city and a very rural part of the country change over time. And we're talking about the changes in industrialization, the increases in deaths by opioid substance use, like all the hardships. We've seen some real economic shocks affect both communities. We've seen the polarization take place. So what was present to me going back in mind there was how I love my wife, we love our family, but in some ways there are parts of where you're located that now make it hard for some other group that's located somewhere else to think that you know what their life is like. And everybody feels that way. And so coming back to this funeral, we had our moments in the small town of recognizing they know I'm not from here. We're talking a town with like 6,000 people. So if I'm, at the convenience store, people know that like, hey, he's not from here. And I'm not. And that's okay. But I also saw in that same week neighbors with teenagers who willingly come across the street to sit with my mother-in-law. And I think about, I don't have any neighbors that would do that. Right. And so I started really wrestling with this. And what's really helpful, there is a book called Strangers in Their Own Land by Arlie Russell Hochschild. And she went in, I think, 2012 to 2016, I think, to study Tea Party movement in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And she's from Berkeley. So I think in her mind as a sociologist, you can't get further apart. And that helped her understand the template of people who seem to be different. The purpose of my story is to say that there's qualities of communities in small spaces like this that are all about endurance, dignity, loyalty, because they need it to survive. So when you think about the purity they have to the loyalties, whether it be God or their country or their flag, and then you go out to bigger cosmopolitan, it's literally called the cosmopolitan self, open to experience, flexible, open-minded. These are human reactions to the context. And what we've done in our society is make them quality and character statements. And that is making things feel further apart. And so that week really helped me understand that there's this kind of thought of like the two sides, the aisles, how are things rural and urban? How are they going to get along? When I realized, going back to some insights about moral psychology itself, we need all of these things to function. There needs to be some committed party around fairness that also needs to make sure that there is caring. And there also needs to be someone who is dedicated to loyalty and to order, or the streets aren't safe and there isn't somebody to respond to the person who's living on the street, the same street. And so right now, the differences have kind of fractured that mindset. And what has been visiting for me, and I'm processing it a bit here because I've been writing about it a little bit in another project that I'm working on, is that if we can come to a place where we realize these characteristics are things that communities themselves need. That is the function of a team. Not everybody on a football team can be the tackle. Not everybody can be the quarterback. Not everybody can be the corner. But we do need all of these things. And right now we think that only one of these sets of mentalities is the right one. And that's why we're stuck. So if I was sitting here in a marriage counseling moment, I would dress this all up for the two sides who are fighting with each other. And I'd say, and this is what we do, and this is what you do, and this is what you do. And this is how your suffering goes up and you feel more stuck and alone. And that's what I would say to the audience with this really powerful question that you've offered.
Matt Sandoval, thank you so much for being open to this conversation. It's been great visiting with you and getting to know you and your organization. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Matt. This was wonderful.
My thanks again to Matt Sandoval, CEO of Art Heals Arizona. One thing I'll continue thinking about from this conversation is Matt's reminder that leadership isn't only about solving problems, it's about understanding people. Sometimes that means listening for the voices that haven't yet been heard. Sometimes it means being curious about resistance instead of trying to eliminate it. And sometimes it means creating the conditions where healing, trust, and hope can begin to grow. And that leaves all of us with a question worth considering in our own leadership. When someone resists a decision you're trying to make, do you see an obstacle or an opportunity to better understand the people you're trying to serve? Now, whether that's a conversation with your governing board, your leadership team, or simply a question worth reflecting on yourself, I hope you'll give it some thought. And of course, if this conversation sparked an insight, a question, or a perspective you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. Reach me at 602-688-2724 and leave a message. And if you've been through the kinds of leadership experiences that leave you a little wiser than when you began, I'd love to hear your story. Just click the guest link in the show notes. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick, Living the Dream Tantillo. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.